The auction house smelled of old wood and desperation. I could taste it on my tongue, metallic and bitter, like blood mixed with fear. My arms tightened around the bundle pressed against my chest, feeling the soft rise and fall of my daughter's breathing beneath the threadbare blanket. She was 3 months old, 3 months of existing in a world that had already decided we were worthless. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and clinical, casting sickly shadows across the faces of the other Omegas lined against the wall. Some stood with their heads bowed, resigned. Others trembled, their scent sour with terror. I tried to keep mine neutral, tried to breathe through the panic clawing at my throat. My pale blonde hair, the one feature I'd inherited from a mother I barely remembered, hung limp around my face, unwashed for days. It was easier to be invisible when you looked like nothing. Lot 17. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the silence like a whip. Omega female, age 22. Rejected mate. Comes with infant. Comes with... As if my daughter were a defect, an unfortunate accessory that lowered my value even further. I'd known this moment was coming since the night Thomas looked at me with those cold eyes and said the words that shattered everything. I, Thomas Garrett of the Riverbend Pack, reject you, Sarah Whitmore, as my mate and Omega. The bond had snapped like a bone breaking, and I'd fallen to my knees in our kitchen while he walked out the door. He'd left before dawn the next morning, before he could see the positive pregnancy test I'd been holding, before he could know that his rejection hadn't been quite fast enough to prevent the consequences of our mating heat. The Riverbend Pack had given me 2 weeks to leave their territory, 2 weeks to pack what little I owned, to give birth alone in a clinic that reeked of disinfectant and judgment, to realize that no pack would take in a rejected Omega with a child born of a severed bond. The baby wasn't even supposed to survive. Rejection during pregnancy usually ended in miscarriage, but my daughter had clung to life with a fierceness that terrified me. Because I knew the world would punish her for it, my grandmother's voice echoed in my memory, soft and weathered like old paper. Strength isn't always loud, little bird. Sometimes it's just getting up one more time than they knock you down. She'd been the only one who'd ever made me feel like I mattered, the only one who'd seen past the weak scent, the small frame, the Omega designation that marked me as lesser. She'd died when I was 16, and I'd been unmoored ever since. The door at the back of the auction house opened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I felt him before I saw him. A pressure against my senses like standing too close to a storm, like something vast and dangerous had just entered the room and swallowed all the air. The other Omegas pressed themselves against the wall, their fear suddenly sharp enough to cut. Even the auctioneer stuttered, his clipboard clattering against the podium. "My lord," he managed, voice strangled. "We weren't expecting—" "Continue," a voice commanded, and it rolled through the space like thunder in the distance. Deep, controlled, absolute. I couldn't help it. I looked up. He stood in the doorway, and he was exactly what nightmares were made of. Tall enough that he had to duck slightly beneath the frame, with shoulders that seemed to span the width of the entrance. His dark hair was swept back from a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so severe, all sharp angles and harder edges. His eyes were the color of smoke and steel, and they swept across the room with the kind of assessment that suggested he was calculating threat levels and weaknesses in the same glance. But it was the power radiating from him that made my knees weak. Not attraction, not yet, but pure survival instinct. This was an alpha, not just any alpha. The scent of pine and winter frost and something ancient rolled off him in waves, making every Omega in the room lower their gaze in automatic submission. All except me. I was too frozen with fear to look away. His gaze locked with mine across the room, and something flickered in those steel-gray eyes. Surprise, maybe, or curiosity. It lasted only a heartbeat before his expression shuddered again into that mask of cold authority. "Lot 17, the auctioneer repeated, his voice higher now, nervous. "Rejected Omega comes with—" "I heard you the first time." The alpha moved into the room with the kind of grace that predators possessed, purposeful and economical. "What pack?" "Riverbend, my lord. The rejection was—" "I know what a rejection is." His tone could have frozen fire. He stopped about 10 feet from where I stood, close enough that I could see the scars that crossed his knuckles, the way his jaw tensed as he studied me. Why the child? The auctioneer cleared his throat. The Omega was already pregnant when the rejection occurred. The father wants no claim, obviously. The word was dry, contemptuous. Those gray eyes dropped to the bundle in my arms, and I instinctively held my daughter closer. His gaze snapped back to my face. How old? It took me a moment to realize he was speaking to me directly. When I opened my mouth, my voice came out rougher than I'd intended. 3 months. And you? He tilted his head slightly, still watching me with that unnerving intensity. How long rejected? Since I was 2 months along. The words tasted like ash. I'd said them so many times in the past few weeks. To social workers, to PAC officials, to the cold woman who'd processed my paperwork at the auction house. Each time felt like scraping at a wound that wouldn't heal. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite sympathy, but perhaps understanding. Or maybe I was imagining it, projecting hope onto a man who looked like he'd carved hope out of his chest long ago. Name, he said. Sarah. I hesitated, then added what I was supposed to. No PAC name anymore, my lord. The child's name. I almost didn't answer. Names had power, and giving him my daughter's name felt like handing over the last piece of her that truly belonged to me. But refusing an alpha, especially this one, wasn't an option. Luna. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost imperceptibly. Optimistic. Hopeful, I corrected, surprising myself with the edge in my voice. My grandmother had named her, in the letter she'd left me years ago. Instructions for if I ever had a daughter. Luna. For the moon that guides us through darkness. There's a difference. His eyebrow lifted fractionally, and I realized what I'd just done. Contradicted an alpha. Added an opinion he hadn't asked for. Heat flooded my face, and I dropped my gaze to the floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. The silence stretched out, painful and sharp. I could hear my daughter's small noises against my chest, the nervous breathing of the other Omegas, the buzz of those awful fluorescent lights. 500,000, he said finally, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. The auctioneer choked. My lord, the starting bid is only... I'm not bidding. I'm buying. He pulled a phone from his pocket, made a brief call, and within seconds the auctioneer's own phone was buzzing with what must have been a confirmation of transfer. The alpha's eyes never left my face. I want the paperwork expedited. She leaves with me today. Of course, my lord. Right away. The auctioneer was practically tripping over himself, gesturing frantically at an assistant. If you'll just... The contracts need to be... I know what needs to be done. Those steel gray eyes pinned me in place. Get your things. I didn't have things. Everything I owned was in a duffel bag by the door, barely enough to fill a grocery sack. I shifted Luna in my arms, trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand why this terrifying alpha had just spent an obscene amount of money on an Omega that should have sold for a fraction of that, if at all. He noticed my hesitation. Problem? I don't understand, I said quietly, hating how small my voice sounded. Why would you? You're not required to understand. He turned away, already moving toward the door as if the matter was settled, as if he hadn't just purchased a person like one might purchase livestock. Then he paused, glancing back over his shoulder. The light caught his face differently from this angle, highlighting the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. But you'll have a roof, food, and safety. The child, too. That's more than you have now. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, and we both knew it was true. I followed him. The vehicle he led me to wasn't what I expected. Not some ostentatious display of wealth, but a black SUV that looked built for function rather than show. Bulletproof glass, I realized, noting the thickness of the windows. Reinforced frame. This was a vehicle designed to withstand attacks. A driver stood waiting, a beta male with sharp eyes and a military bearing. He opened the back door without a word, his gaze skipping over me with professional disinterest before landing on the alpha with something that looked like concern. Home, Garrett, the alpha said, sliding into the seat beside me with a grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. The door closed with a heavy final sound. Garrett. The name tickled something in my memory, but I was too overwhelmed to chase it down. I fumbled with the seatbelt one-handed, trying not to jostle Luna, who had started to fuss against my chest. Her small whimpers escalated into cries, that distinctive newborn sound that never failed to spike my anxiety. "She's hungry," I said unnecessarily, feeling my face heat. "I'm sorry, I can feed her." He wasn't looking at me, his attention on his phone, fingers moving across the screen with efficient precision. "I'm not a monster." I hesitated, then adjusted my shirt as discreetly as possible, helping Luna latch. The crying stopped immediately, replaced by small, satisfied sounds that made my chest ache with love so fierce it was painful. I kept my eyes down, hyper-aware of the alpha beside me, of the expensive leather seats, of how out of place I must look with my greasy hair and secondhand clothes. The silence stretched as we drove through streets I didn't recognize, leaving the industrial district where the auction house squatted like a wound. The city transformed around us, buildings growing taller, cleaner, the cars on the road newer and sleeker. We were heading into money, the kind of neighborhood where people like me only existed to clean houses or deliver packages. "You'll have your own room," he said abruptly, still not looking at me. "Connected to the nursery. There's staff, a housekeeper, security, a cook. Stay out of my office and the East Wing. Those areas are private." I processed this slowly, trying to map out what my life had just become. What do you want from me?" Now he did look at me, and the directness of his gaze made me feel stripped bare. "Clarify. You paid $500,000 for a rejected Omega with a baby." My voice was steadier than I felt. "There has to be a reason. Some expectation." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You'll maintain the household when appropriate, provide company when I require it, and behave in a manner befitting my home. That's all." Company. The word felt loaded, dangerous. "Conversation," he said flatly. "Presence at dinners when I host. Nothing more. I'm not interested in unwilling partners, and you're in no condition to be willing." His tone made it clear the subject was closed. "My name is Damon Frost. I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Territories." The title hit me like cold water. I'd heard of Damon Frost. Everyone had. He'd unified the Northern Pacts 15 years ago after a brutal war that left thousands dead. He was known for being ruthless, strategic, and completely without mercy for his enemies. There were rumors about what he'd done to the Alphas who'd opposed him, stories whispered in the dark that made children check under their beds. And I was sitting in his car, feeding my daughter while he calmly outlined the terms of what amounted to my captivity. "I know what you're thinking," he said, his voice cutting through my spiraling thoughts. "That you've traded one prison for another. Maybe you have. But no one will touch you in my home. No one will touch her." His eyes dropped to Luna briefly, something unreadable crossing his features. "You have my word." "Why?" The question escaped before I could stop it. "Why do you care?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. The car turned onto a tree-lined drive, massive oaks creating a tunnel of green above us. In the distance, I could see a house. No, a mansion. All stone and glass and imposing architecture that spoke of old money and older power. "Because someone should have cared about you before it came to this," he said finally, his voice so low I almost didn't catch it. And they didn't. The car stopped in front of wide stone steps, leading to double doors that looked like they belonged on a castle. Garrett opened my door, offering a hand I didn't take, too busy staring at the place that was apparently now my home. It was beautiful in the way museums were beautiful. Impressive and untouchable and completely foreign. Damon was already striding up the steps, and I scrambled to follow, clutching Luna and my pathetic duffel bag. The doors opened before he reached them, revealing a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair pulled into a neat bun, and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything twice and wasn't impressed either time. "Mrs. Chen," Damon said by way of greeting, "this is Sarah and her daughter Luna. They'll be staying in the blue suite. See that it's prepared." Mrs. Chen's eyes swept over me with the same professional assessment the driver had used, but there was something softer beneath it. Pity, maybe, or understanding. "Of course, my lord. Welcome, dear. Let's get you settled." Damon was already walking away, his phone to his ear, his voice dropping into business tones that suggested I'd already been forgotten. Mrs. Chen touched my elbow gently, guiding me toward a sweeping staircase that curved up to the second floor. "Don't mind him," she said quietly. "His bark is worse than his bite, usually." "Usually?" I couldn't help the tremor in my voice. She smiled, and it transformed her stern face into something almost grandmotherly. "You'll be safe here. That's more than most can say. Come on, let's get you fed and cleaned up. When did you last eat?" I couldn't remember. Yesterday? The day before? Time had blurred into a haze of fear and bureaucracy since the auction house had collected me from the shelter. "Mrs. Chen made a disapproving sound and picked up her pace, ushering me down a hallway lined with artwork that probably cost more than I'd earn in a lifetime. The blue suite was bigger than the entire apartment I'd shared with Thomas. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens, and a king-sized bed dominated the main room, draped in linens that looked like they'd never been touched. An open door revealed a nursery beyond, already furnished with a crib, changing table, and enough baby supplies to stock a store. "How?" I started, but Mrs. Chen was already moving around the room, opening drawers, checking the bathroom. He called ahead from the auction house, had everything delivered and set up within an hour. She pulled out a soft towel from the bathroom. "There's a shower through there. Take your time. I'll bring up food and watch the little one if you'd like." The offer was so unexpected, so kind, that tears burned behind my eyes. I blinked them back furiously. I can't. "You can, and you will." Mrs. Chen's tone brooked no argument. She held out her arms. I raised 4 of my own. "I remember what it's like to be so tired you can barely stand. Go, shower, I'll be right here." Handing Luna to someone else felt like tearing off a limb, but the promise of hot water and even 10 minutes alone was too tempting. I passed my daughter over carefully, watching Mrs. Chen settle into the rocking chair with practiced ease, cooing softly at Luna's curious face. The bathroom was all marble and gleaming fixtures, with a shower large enough for 3 people. I stood under the spray for longer than I should have, watching the water circle the drain and trying to understand how my life had changed so completely in the span of a few hours. This morning I'd been nothing, less than nothing, merchandise waiting to be sold to whoever would take a chance on damaged goods. Now I was in a mansion, under the protection of the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories, with my daughter safe and fed and warm. I didn't trust it, couldn't trust it. Nothing in my life had ever been given freely. There was always a cost, always strings attached, and Damon Frost hadn't survived a war and unified warring pacts by being charitable. Whatever his reasons for buying me, they served him somehow. I just had to figure out how. When I emerged, clean and dressed in the same worn clothes because they were all I had, Mrs. Chen had laid out a tray of food on the small table by the window. Soup, bread, cheese, fruit, simple food, but more than I'd seen in weeks. Luna was asleep in the crib, her tiny fists curled beside her face. "Eat," Mrs. Chen commanded. "Then rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about tomorrow." But I couldn't stop worrying. Even as I ate mechanically, forcing food down a throat tight with anxiety, even as exhaustion dragged at my bones, my mind kept circling back to Damon Frost and the way he'd looked at my daughter. Not with disgust or inconvenience, but with something that almost looked like recognition. Because someone should have cared about you before it came to this. What did he know about not being cared for? He was a king, powerful and wealthy and feared. What could he possibly understand about being rejected, about being sold like livestock, about the desperate mathematics of survival that had led me to that auction house? I finished eating and climbed into the enormous bed, every muscle in my body screaming with relief at the soft mattress. Through the open door to the nursery, I could see Luna's small form in the crib, chest rising and falling with each breath. Safe. She was safe. That was all that mattered. I closed my eyes and tried not to think about the cost of that safety, or what would happen when Damon Frost decided to collect on whatever debt I now owed him. I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten to cover, and the sound of Luna fussing in the nursery. For a disoriented moment, I couldn't remember where I was. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet, the air smelling of lavender instead of mildew and desperation. Then it crashed back. The auction house, Damon Frost, this strange new prison that looked like a palace. Luna's fussing escalated to crying, and I stumbled out of bed, my body still heavy with exhaustion despite sleeping harder than I had in months. She was red-faced and angry, tiny fists waving, and the familiar weight of her in my arms settled something frantic in my chest. "I know, sweet girl," I murmured, settling into the rocking chair to feed her. "I know. Everything's strange. But we're okay. We're going to be okay." I repeated it like a prayer, like if I said it enough times it might become true. A soft knock came at the door, and Mrs. Chen entered with a tray balanced on one hip. She took in the scene with a quick, assessing glance, then smiled. "Good morning. I brought breakfast. There's also clothing in the closet. I had to estimate sizes, but we can adjust if needed." "I can't accept," I started, but she was already setting down the tray, already moving toward the closet. "You can, and you will," she said firmly, the same words from last night. "His lordship's orders. He's very particular about how his household presents itself." She pulled out a simple dress, soft blue cotton that looked comfortable and practical. "This should work for today. When you're ready, he'd like to see you in his study." My stomach dropped. "When?" "No rush. Feed the baby, eat something, get dressed. He's been in meetings all morning anyway." She paused at the door, her expression softening. "Don't look so terrified, dear. He's not going to hurt you." But that wasn't what I was afraid of. Pain was straightforward, simple. I knew how to survive pain. It was the unknown that terrified me. Not knowing what he wanted, what role I was supposed to play, how long this reprieve would last before the other shoe dropped. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing, then changed into the dress Mrs. Chen had left. It fit surprisingly well, and the fabric was softer than anything I'd worn in years. There was even underwear in the drawers, all in my size, along with nursing bras and pajamas, and more clothes than I'd owned in my entire life. The level of preparation was unsettling. He'd known he was going to buy me before he'd even entered that auction house. This hadn't been impulse or pity. It had been planned, calculated, purposeful. I changed Luna's diaper, dressed her in one of the impossibly tiny outfits from the nursery, and steeled myself. Better to face this now than spend the day spiraling with anxiety. The house was even more intimidating in daylight. I followed Mrs. Chen's directions down hallways lined with portraits of stern-faced alphas, past rooms whose purposes I could only guess at, until I found myself standing before a heavy wooden door. I could hear voices inside, Damon's deep rumble and another male voice, younger, more animated. I knocked softly, almost hoping he wouldn't hear. "Enter." The study was exactly what I'd expected. All dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and windows that overlooked the grounds. Damon sat behind a massive desk, still dressed in dark clothes that seemed to absorb light. Standing across from him was a younger man, maybe mid-20s, with tousled brown hair and an easy smile that seemed out of place in the serious atmosphere. "Sarah," Damon said, gesturing to a chair. "This is Adrian, my second in command." Adrian, Sarah, and her daughter Luna. Adrian's smile widened, genuine warmth in his hazel eyes. "Nice to meet you both. Welcome to the madhouse." He shot Damon a teasing look. "Did he give you the whole, 'stay out of my office' speech? He loves that speech." "Adrian." Damon's tone held warning, but there was something almost fond beneath it. "What?" "I'm making her feel welcome. Someone has to, since you have the emotional range of a brick wall." Adrian winked at me, and despite my nerves, I felt my lips twitch toward a smile. Damon sighed, the sound of someone long suffering. "If you're finished?" "For now." Adrian headed for the door, pausing to look back at me. "If you need anything, and I mean anything, find me. Don't let the grumpy alpha intimidate you. He's actually a softie under all that." He ducked out before Damon could respond, his laughter echoing down the hallway. The silence after his exit felt heavier. Damon studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Luna chose that moment to make a small cooing sound, and his gaze dropped to her face, something flickering in those steel-gray eyes. "How old are you?" he asked abruptly. 22. "And the father, Thomas Garrett. How long were you together?" The name made me flinch. 2 years. We were childhood friends. When the mate bond snapped between us, everyone said we were lucky. Same pack, same age, already compatible. I looked down at Luna, her small fingers wrapped around my thumb. I thought I was lucky too. What changed? I don't know. The words came out more bitter than I'd intended. One day he looked at me and decided I wasn't enough. Maybe I never was. The bond can tell you you're mates, but it can't make someone love you. Damon's jaw tightened. He rejected you while you were pregnant. He didn't know. I found out the day after. I met his eyes, needing him to understand this part. I tried to tell him, went to his new apartment, but he wouldn't see me. His mother. I stopped, the memory still sharp. She looked at me with such disgust, standing in the doorway like I was something contaminated. She said a rejected Omega had no business trying to trap her son with a bastard child. She said if I came back, she'd call the enforcers. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. When Damon spoke, his voice was soft in a way that made my skin prickle with warning. "Give me their names. All of them." "Why?" "Because Riverbend Pack falls under my jurisdiction, and they broke laws, both pack law and territorial law, by forcing you out while pregnant and vulnerable." His fingers drummed once against the desk, a sharp staccato. "No pack has the right to exile a pregnant Omega without providing alternative placement and support. They threw you away and hoped you'd disappear quietly. I'm already rejected, already sold. What does it matter now? It matters because laws exist for a reason. Because allowing one pack to violate them with impunity encourages others to do the same." He leaned back in his chair, still watching me with that unnerving intensity. "And because you deserve to see them answer for what they did to you." The offer was tempting. God, it was so tempting. To watch Thomas's face when he realized he couldn't just discard me. To see his mother's disgust turn to fear. But revenge was a luxury I couldn't afford. "What do you want in return?" His eyebrow lifted. "I want you to stop assuming everything has a cost." "Everything does." I kept my voice steady, even as my heart hammered. "You paid $500,000 for me. You've given me clothes, food, safety. You're offering to go after my old pack. None of that is free. So what do you want?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he stood, moving to the window, his back to me. The sunlight caught in his dark hair, highlighting strands of gray at his temples I hadn't noticed before. "I want you to stay," he said finally. "I want you to let me be what your daughter needs. A father, a protector, someone who won't abandon her because of circumstances she didn't choose." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You don't even know her. I don't have to." He turned back, and the rawness in his expression made my breath catch. "I know what it's like to be the child no one wanted, to grow up knowing you were a mistake, a burden, something to be managed rather than loved. I won't let her grow up believing that." "And me?" My voice came out smaller than I'd intended. "What am I in this scenario, whatever you want to be?" He moved back to the desk, bracing his hands against it, his gaze holding mine. "I'm not asking you to be my mate. I'm not asking for your body or your affection. But I am offering you partnership. Help me raise her. Let me give you both the life you should have had. And in return," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "in return, maybe we can both stop being so alone." The vulnerability in that last sentence nearly undid me. This powerful alpha, this king who'd unified territories through strength and strategy, was admitting to loneliness, to isolation, to the same hollow ache that had lived in my chest for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be whole. "I don't trust you," I said honestly. "I don't trust anyone anymore." "Good." A hint of a smile touched his lips, there and gone. "Trust is earned, not given. I'll earn yours, Sarah, and you'll earn mine. That's how this works." Luna started to fuss, and I automatically began rocking her, the motion soothing us both. "What if I can't? What if I'm too broken for this? Then we'll be broken together. He straightened, some of that commanding presence sliding back into place. I have a proposition. Give me 6 months. 6 months to prove that this can work, that you and Luna can have a real life here. If at the end of that time you want to leave, I'll set you up somewhere safe with enough money to start over. No strings, no obligations. And if I stay, then we'll figure out what comes next, together. It was insane. All of it was insane. But the alternative was going back to nothing. No pack, no home, no future for my daughter, except the same rejection and struggle I'd endured. At least here, Luna had a chance. At least here, she could grow up safe and fed and warm. Okay, I whispered, then stronger. Okay, 6 months. Something like relief crossed his face. So quick I almost missed it. Good. Adrian will show you around the grounds later. There's a garden you might like. It's quiet, private. Mrs. Chen will help with anything you need. It was a dismissal, but a gentle one. I stood, adjusting Luna in my arms, and headed for the door. His voice stopped me before I reached it. Sarah? I turned back. He was watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Thank you. For giving this a chance. For giving me a chance. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and escaped into the hallway. My hands were shaking, my heart racing, my mind spinning with everything that had just happened. 6 months. I'd agreed to 6 months with a man I didn't know, in a world I didn't understand, gambling my daughter's future on the word of an alpha who'd bought us like property. But as I made my way back to our suite, Luna's warm weight against my chest, I couldn't shake the memory of how he'd looked at her. Not with obligation or resentment, but with something fierce and protective and achingly sincere. Maybe, just maybe, we'd both found something we'd been looking for without knowing we needed it. 3 weeks passed in a blur of routine and careful distance. I learned the rhythms of Damon's household. He rose before dawn, worked in his study until mid-morning, then disappeared for hours to handle pack business I wasn't privy to. He returned for dinner, sometimes alone, sometimes with Adrian or other council members whose names I struggled to remember. On those nights, I stayed in my room, feeding Luna, and telling myself I was grateful for the solitude, but the isolation was starting to feel less like safety and more like imprisonment of a different kind. The gardens became my sanctuary. Mrs. Chen had been right. There was a section behind the east wing, surrounded by high stone walls covered in climbing roses, with a fountain that sang soft music into the air. I'd bring Luna there in the afternoons, spreading a blanket on the grass and letting her stare up at the sky while I read from the small library I'd discovered on the second floor. It was in the garden that Adrian found me on a Tuesday afternoon, Luna dozing on my chest while I worked through a novel about people whose problems seemed so much simpler than mine. "There you are," he said, dropping onto the grass beside me with easy familiarity. "I've been looking everywhere. Well, everywhere except here, apparently. Should have known you'd find the one spot Damon actually loves." I looked up, startled. "He comes here?" "Used to. Before things got so complicated." Adrian plucked a blade of grass, twirling it between his fingers. "He built this garden for his sister. She died when he was 19, some kind of fever that spread through the northern territories. He couldn't save her." The information settled heavily in my chest. I didn't know he had a sister. Not many people do. He doesn't talk about her. Doesn't talk about much, really, unless it's pack business or strategy. Adrian's hazel eyes found mine, serious for once. "But he talks about you, about Luna." My heart skipped. "What does he say?" "That you're stronger than you think, that Luna's lucky to have you, that he hopes." Adrian stopped, seeming to reconsider. "That he hopes you'll stay, after the 6 months are up. It's only been 3 weeks. Yeah. But Damon's not exactly known for patience when he wants something." Adrian smiled, softer now. "And I think he wants this to work more than he'll admit, even to himself." Before I could respond, a commotion from the house made us both turn. Raised voices, the sound of car doors slamming. Adrian was on his feet instantly, his relaxed demeanor vanishing into something sharp and alert. "Stay here," he commanded, already moving toward the house. But I couldn't. Some instinct made me gather Luna close and follow at a distance, my heart hammering. The voices grew louder as I approached the main entrance. Damon's controlled thunder and another man's voice, angry and familiar enough to make my blood run cold. Thomas. I stopped at the edge of the foyer, hidden by a massive marble column. Luna clutched against my chest. Through the gap, I could see them. Damon standing at the top of the entrance steps, radiating controlled fury, and Thomas at the bottom, looking smaller than I remembered, but just as cruel. His mother stood behind him, her face twisted with the same disgust she'd shown me months ago. "You had no right," Thomas was saying, his voice shaking with rage. "She's damaged goods, a rejected Omega with a bastard. Careful." The single word from Damon could have cut steel. "Very careful what you say next. She was mine to reject, mine to dispose of. You've overstepped, Alpha King or not." Pack law, Damon interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "States that a pregnant Omega cannot be exiled without alternative placement. You threw her out. You violated territorial law, federal law, and basic decency. So here's what's going to happen. Riverbend Pack will pay restitution. $2 million to be held in trust for the child you abandoned. You will formally relinquish all parental rights. And you will never." He took a step down, and even from my hidden position, I could feel the power rolling off him. "Never come near them again." Thomas's face had gone white. $2 million. That will bankrupt us. Then perhaps you should have thought of that before breaking laws I'm sworn to uphold. Damon's smile was terrible, all teeth and no warmth. "Consider it cheap. If I were a less civilized man, I'd challenge you for what you did. And we both know how that would end." The threat hung in the air, crystal clear. Thomas would die. Alphas didn't lose challenges to anyone, let alone to the Alpha King. Thomas's mother stepped forward, her voice shrill. She trapped him, got herself pregnant to force Mrs. Garrett. Adrian appeared beside Damon, his usual easy manner replaced by cold authority. "I strongly suggest you stop talking. His lordship is being remarkably generous. Don't test that generosity." "Generous? He's protecting some used-up Omega. She's under my protection." Damon's voice cracked like a whip. "Which means she's untouchable. Which means you will speak of her with respect, or you will lose the ability to speak at all. Am I clear?" The silence was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Finally, Thomas nodded jerkily, his face a mask of humiliation and rage. "Crystal clear, my lord. Good. You have 72 hours to transfer the funds and file the paperwork. If you're late, the amount doubles." Damon turned away, dismissing them as completely as if they'd ceased to exist. "Garrett, see them out and make sure security knows they're never to be admitted again." I pressed myself further behind the column as Thomas and his mother were escorted away, their angry voices fading. My whole body was shaking, adrenaline and shock and something else. Something that felt dangerously like vindication, flooding through me. "You can come out now," Damon said quietly, still facing away. "I know you're there." Of course he did. I stepped into view, Luna stirring against my chest, and found him watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He descended the steps slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. "They broke the law. But more than that, they hurt you, hurt Luna. That I can't allow. $2 million is nothing compared to what they deserve." His jaw tightened. I wanted to challenge him. Adrian had to talk me down, twice. The admission shocked me. Why? Because when I think about what they did, throwing you out pregnant, forcing you into that auction house, treating you like you were worthless. He stopped, breathing carefully, visibly reining himself in. "Because you deserved better. You both did." Luna chose that moment to wake fully, her small face scrunching before letting out a wail. I automatically started the soothing motions, rocking and shushing, but she was inconsolable, her cries echoing off the marble. "May I?" Damon asked, and before I could process the question, he was holding out his arms. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to keep my daughter close and safe, but something in his expression, hopeful and uncertain and achingly sincere, made me carefully transfer Luna into his arms. He held her awkwardly at first, This powerful alpha who commanded territories, clearly unsure how to handle 7 pounds of angry infant. But then he adjusted his grip, supporting her head, and began a gentle swaying motion. "Hey there, little one," he murmured, his voice dropping to something soft and almost musical. "It's all right. You're safe. I've got you." And Luna miraculously began to quiet. Her cries faded to whimpers, then to small hiccuping sounds as she stared up at Damon's face with wide, curious eyes. He smiled. A real smile, unguarded and genuine, and something in my chest cracked open. "She likes you," I said, my voice rough with emotions I couldn't name. "I hope so." He looked up, meeting my eyes over Luna's head. I meant what I said, about being her father, about giving her everything she deserves. Both of you. "I heard what you said to Thomas, about challenging him." I took a breath, steadying myself. "Were you serious?" "Completely. If he'd said one more word about you or Luna, I would have torn his throat out right there." No anger in his voice now, just flat certainty. Adrian reminded me that would be poor politics. Messy. But God, Sarah, I wanted to. The violence in the words should have frightened me. Instead, it felt like protection. Like someone finally standing between me and the world that had tried to break me. "Thank you," I whispered, "for defending us. For caring when no one else did. Someone should have cared sooner." He looked back down at Luna, his expression softening. "She's beautiful. She has your eyes. And her father's stubborn chin, apparently." The words escaped before I could stop them, and I tensed, waiting for him to react to the reminder that Luna wasn't his, would never be his blood. But he just smiled. "Then she'll be unstoppable, stubborn and beautiful. The world doesn't stand a chance." We stood there in the afternoon sunlight, this strange little tableau of 3 people learning how to be something like a family. Damon continued swaying with Luna, humming something under his breath, while I watched and tried to reconcile the terrifying Alpha King with the man who held my daughter like she was made of glass and wishes. "I want to stay," I said abruptly. "After the 6 months, if the offer still stands." He went very still. "You're sure?" "No," I admitted. "I'm not sure about anything, but I'm sure I want to try. Luna deserves this, deserves you. And maybe I do too. You do." The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. "You both do. And I'll spend every day proving that to you." Adrian appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "Hate to interrupt, but you have the council meeting in 10 minutes. They're already gathering in the conference room." Damon sighed, that long-suffering sound I was beginning to recognize. "Of course they are." He looked down at Luna with obvious reluctance. "I should probably give her back. She's comfortable," I said, surprising myself. "You could, if you wanted, you could bring her with you, to the meeting. I don't mind." His eyebrows rose. "You trust me with her? You stood up to my ex-mate and threatened to challenge him to the death. You held her until she stopped crying. You called her beautiful." I smiled, small but real. "Yeah, I think I'm starting to trust you." The look on his face, wonder and gratitude and something deeper, made my breath catch. "Then I'll bring her back after. And tonight, maybe you'll join me for dinner? Just us. No council, no business, just us." It felt like a line being crossed, a step toward something neither of us had named yet, but I nodded. "I'd like that." He smiled again, that unguarded expression that transformed his severe features into something almost gentle, and headed inside with Luna cradled against his chest like she'd always belonged there. Adrian fell into step beside him, shooting me a knowing grin before they disappeared into the house. I stood alone in the foyer, sunlight streaming through the windows, and felt the first real flutter of hope I'd experienced in months. Maybe we could do this. Maybe we could build something real from the broken pieces we'd all been carrying. Maybe, just maybe, we were all exactly where we needed to be. 6 months turned into 8, then 10, and somewhere along the way I stopped counting. The days blurred into a rhythm that felt less like survival and more like living. Mornings with Luna in the garden, afternoons reading while she napped, Evenings with Damon where we talked about everything and nothing until the stars came out. He'd kept his promise. Every single one. The trust fund for Luna was established with the restitution money, untouchable until she turned 18. Thomas had signed away his parental rights without contest, too afraid of Damon's wrath to do otherwise. And slowly, carefully, Damon had earned my trust the way he'd said he would, through consistency, through showing up, through being exactly who he'd promised to be. But it was the small things that undid me. The way he'd learned to change diapers, swearing under his breath while Luna giggled at his incompetence. How he'd rearranged his schedule to be home for her bedtime, reading her stories in that deep voice until she fell asleep in his arms. The morning I'd found him asleep in the nursery rocking chair, Luna sprawled on his chest, both of them snoring softly. He'd become her father in every way that mattered. And somewhere in the process of watching them fall in love with each other, I'd started falling too. It terrified me. Winter had come to the Northern Territories, covering the grounds in pristine snow that Luna was still too small to appreciate. She was 8 months old now, trying to crawl, babbling constantly in a language only she understood. Damon swore she'd said Dada last week, though I was pretty sure it had been Baba. We'd argued about it for an hour, both of us grinning like idiots. I was in the library when Adrian found me, curled in the window seat with a book I wasn't really reading. The holidays were approaching, and Damon had asked if I wanted to invite anyone. Family, friends. I'd said no, because there was no one left who'd want to come. My grandmother was gone. My parents had died when I was young. Thomas's pack had been my only community, and they'd made it clear I was unwelcome. Penny for your thoughts? Adrian dropped into the chair across from me, his usual smile dimmed with concern. Not worth that much. I closed the book, giving up the pretense. Just thinking. Dangerous pastime, but his tone was gentle. Want to talk about it? I did, desperately, but the words felt stuck. How could I explain that I was terrified of being happy? That every day I waited for this to fall apart? For Damon to realize I wasn't worth the effort? For the other shoe to finally drop? He loves you, you know, Adrian said quietly, reading my silence correctly. I've known Damon for 15 years. And I've never seen him like this. The way he looks at you. At Luna. It's real, Sarah. But what if it's not enough? The words burst out before I could stop them. What if I'm too damaged, too broken? What if you stopped waiting for the world to hurt you and started believing you deserved to be loved? Adrian leaned forward, his hazel eyes intense. You're not that Omega in the auction house anymore. You're not rejected or unwanted or less than. You're Sarah. Strong, smart, an amazing mother, and someone who makes Damon smile for the first time in years. Stop punishing yourself for someone else's failure to see your worth. The truth in his words hit like a physical blow. I had been punishing myself, holding back, keeping walls up because it felt safer than risking my heart again. But safety wasn't living, and Luna deserved to grow up seeing her mother happy, not just surviving. Where is he? I asked, already standing. Adrian's grin returned full force. Study. And he's been brooding all afternoon, so you'd be doing us all a favor by cheering him up. I found Damon exactly where Adrian said, staring at papers on his desk with an expression that suggested they'd personally offended him. He looked up when I entered, and something in his face softened immediately. Hey, everything okay? I need to tell you something. I closed the door behind me, my heart racing. And I need you to let me finish before you say anything. High concern flickered across his features, but he nodded, setting down his pen and giving me his full attention. I took a breath, gathering courage. When you bought me, I thought it was the end, that I'd traded one prison for another, that nothing could ever be good again. I waited for you to show your true colors, to reveal what you really wanted from me, but you didn't. You just kept being kind, kept showing up, kept proving that maybe not everyone in the world was cruel. His jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, letting me continue. You became Luna's father, not in name, but in every way that actually matters. You hold her when she cries. You read to her every night. You rearranged your entire life to make room for us. And my voice cracked, emotions overwhelming me. I tried so hard not to fall in love with you, because loving you felt dangerous. Felt like setting myself up to be destroyed again, but I failed. I'm completely, terrifyingly in love with you, and I needed you to know. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything unsaid. Then Damon was moving, crossing the room in 3 long strides and cupping my face in his hands like I was something precious. "Sarah," he breathed, his voice rough. "I've been in love with you since the auction house. Since you looked at me with fear in your eyes but kept your chin up, kept protecting your daughter even when the whole world had turned against you. I bought you because I couldn't stand the thought of someone else taking you, of you disappearing into a life where no one saw how extraordinary you are." "I'm not extraordinary," I whispered. You're everything." His thumbs brushed away tears I hadn't realized were falling. "You're strong and brave, and you love Luna with a fierceness that humbles me. You gave me a chance when you had every reason not to. You let me be her father, let me into your lives, and you've made me happier than I thought I deserved to be." His forehead pressed against mine, his breath warm on my lips. "I love you. I love Luna. And if you'll have me, not as some arrangement or agreement, but as your partner, your mate, your husband, I swear I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt your worth again." "Yes," I sobbed, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." He kissed me then, gentle and reverent, like he was afraid I might shatter. But I was done being fragile. I kissed him back with everything I'd been holding inside, all the fear and hope and desperate love I'd tried to deny. His arms came around me, solid and safe, and for the first time in my life I felt like I'd come home. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against mine again. "I want to do this right. A proper mating ceremony in front of the whole territory. I want everyone to know you're mine, that Luna's mine, that we're a family. People will talk," I said, though I was smiling, "about the rejected Omega who became a queen. Let them talk." His smile was fierce, possessive, full of promise. "Let them see what happens when someone's strong enough to choose love over fear. You're going to be an incredible queen, Sarah." "I don't know how to be a queen. Good thing you'll have time to learn." He kissed my forehead, soft and lingering, "And I'll be right beside you, always." A sound from the doorway made us both look up. Mrs. Chen stood there with Luna in her arms, the baby reaching toward us with delighted squeals. Someone heard voices and got very insistent about joining the reunion. Damon laughed, a sound I'd learned to treasure for its rarity, and took Luna from Mrs. Chen, settling her on his hip. "What do you think, little one? Should we make this official? Should I marry your mama?" Luna grabbed his face with both hands, babbling something that might have been agreement, or might have been a demand for dinner. We all laughed, and Mrs. Chen excused herself with a knowing smile, leaving us alone. "She's gotten so big," I murmured, running my fingers through Luna's soft blonde curls, my color, though her eyes were darkening to something closer to hazel. "I can't believe she's almost walking. She takes after her mother, stubborn, determined, impossible to hold back." Damon shifted Luna to his shoulder, where she immediately started playing with his hair. "I was thinking, for the ceremony. Would you want to formally adopt her? Give her my name legally? I know she's yours, but I'd like her to be ours." The question stole my breath. "You want to adopt her?" "I want to be her father in every possible way. I want her birth certificate to have my name. I want the whole world to know she's my daughter, that I chose her, that she's wanted and loved and mine." His eyes found mine, intense and sincere. "If that's what you want too." "It's what I want," I said through tears. "It's what we both want." The mating ceremony took place 6 weeks later, on a clear winter day when the whole territory gathered to witness. I wore white, not because I was pure or innocent, but because Damon said I deserved to feel like a bride, deserved the fairy tale I'd been denied. Luna wore a matching dress, passed between pack members who cooed over her while Adrian stood as Damon's best man, and Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes in the front row. When Damon placed the mating mark on my neck, the bond snapped into place, different from the one with Thomas, stronger and cleaner and right in ways I hadn't known bonds could be. I felt his love pour through the connection, felt his absolute commitment, felt the way he'd already carved out space in his heart for both Luna and me, my mate. he whispered against my skin. My queen. My family. Forever, I promised back. All of us, forever. The celebration lasted into the night, but we slipped away early, exhausted and happy, and ready to be alone. Luna fell asleep in Damon's arms on the way to the nursery, and we stood together over her crib, watching her sleep with the contentment of parents who knew their child was loved. I keep thinking about the auction house, I admitted quietly, about how terrified I was, how certain that nothing good could come from that day. And now? Damon's arm came around my waist, pulling me against his side. Now I'm grateful, because if I hadn't been there, if you hadn't found us, I looked up at him, at this man who'd become my everything. We would have missed this, missed each other, missed becoming this family. I would have found you eventually, he said with absolute certainty, somehow, some way. You were always meant to be here, with me, with us. Maybe he was right. Maybe some bonds transcended mate marks and pack laws and the arbitrary cruelties of fate. Maybe Luna and I had always been meant to end up here, in this house, with this man who'd chosen to love us when the world said we were unlovable. I'd started in an auction house, rejected and desperate and certain my story was ending. But really, it had been a beginning, the first page of a story about survival and courage, and learning that love wasn't something you had to earn. It was something freely given by the people who saw your worth, even when you couldn't see it yourself. As we stood in the nursery, Damon's arms around me and our daughter sleeping peacefully, I finally understood what my grandmother had been trying to teach me all those years ago. Strength wasn't about never falling down. It was about getting up one more time, about choosing hope over despair, about believing you deserved happiness, and fighting for it even when the world tried to convince you otherwise. I'd been rejected, sold, dismissed as worthless, but I'd also been chosen, loved, and transformed into something stronger than I'd ever imagined. Luna would grow up knowing her worth, would never doubt that she was wanted, would have 2 parents who'd move mountains to keep her safe. And me? I'd become a queen, not because of a title or a crown, but because I'd finally learned to see myself the way Damon saw me. Worthy of love, worthy of respect, worthy of every good thing this life had to offer. We left the nursery hand in hand, closing the door softly behind us. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new adventures as we navigated what it meant to be a family, to be leaders, to be partners in every sense of the word. But tonight, we were just us. 2 broken people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something beautiful from the pieces. And that, I thought, as Damon pulled me close and kissed me under the hallway stars painted on the ceiling, was the greatest love story of all. The one that said you could survive the worst the world had to offer and still come out whole on the other side. That rejection wasn't the end of your story, just the closing of a chapter that never deserved you anyway. That families were built not just by blood, but by choice, by commitment, by showing up every single day and choosing love over fear. I'd been sold with my baby, certain we were heading toward darkness. Instead, I'd found a man who looked at us and said, "I'll be dad and husband both," and meant it with every fiber of his being. Found a home where we were wanted, a future full of possibility, and a love that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. And as Damon led me to our room, his hand warm in mine, and his love flowing through our bond like sunlight, I finally let go of the last remnants of fear and doubt. This was real. This was ours. This was the happy ending I'd stopped believing in but had found anyway. We were finally, truly,